Chicago's most feared mafia boss, a man who would instinctively snap the neck of anyone who touched him without permission, hasn't felt a moment of peace in 12 years. He is a walking nerve ending of violence, a predator trapped in a constant state of hyper-vigilance. Until a 29-year-old chronically exhausted laundromat attendant shoves his loaded gun aside with a cheap plastic laundry basket, tosses a faded pink Hello Kitty hoodie onto his bleeding chest, and rolls her eyes. "If you're going to shoot me for ruining your suit," she sighs, leaning heavily on her dirty mop, "please do it quickly. I have 3 more rows of machines to clean before 6 a.m., and I am far too tired to beg." If you want to hear how a simple night shift worker dismantled the most dangerous syndicate leader in the city without firing a single shot, stick around until the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're listening from. I want to see how far Dante and Aria's war travels. The neon sign outside Spine and Dry flickered with a persistent annoying buzz, casting a sickly blue light across the rain-slicked pavement of the south side. It was 3:14 a.m., the hour of the night when the city didn't just sleep, it played dead. Inside, the rhythmic, heavy thumping of 3 unbalanced washing machines was the only sound keeping Aria Bennett tethered to reality. Aria was 29, though the deep, bruised circles under her hazel eyes and the slump of her shoulders made her look older. She wore a faded blue apron over a cheap gray t-shirt, her dark hair tied back in a messy, practical bun that was currently frizzing from the humidity. For the past 48 hours, she had survived on stale instant coffee, sheer willpower, and the crushing knowledge that her mother's next round of chemotherapy treatments required a down payment she didn't have. She dragged the heavy, waterlogged mop across the cracked linoleum floor. Her muscles screamed in protest, a dull, throbbing ache that had settled deep into her bones. She was invisible, a ghost haunting a forgotten corner of the city, scrubbing away the dirt of strangers for minimum wage. She was so tired she felt like she was hallucinating. Then, the bell above the glass door chimed violently, shattering the hypnotic rhythm of the machines. Aria didn't look up immediately. She just sighed, pushing the mop back into the dirty, sudsy water of her yellow plastic bucket. "We're technically open, but the coin machine is broken. You'll need exact change," she called out, her voice raspy from disuse. There was no answer, only the heavy, wet sound of irregular footsteps and the unmistakable metallic click of a weapon being chambered. That finally made her look up. Standing in the entryway was a nightmare dressed in bespoke charcoal wool. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of broad, muscular build that filled a room and consumed all the oxygen in it. His dark hair was slicked back with rain and something darker. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked carved from marble, and his eyes were the terrifying absolute black of a starless sky. It was Dante Varelli. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. It was whispered in boardrooms and spoken in hushed, fearful tones in back alleys. He was the head of the city's most ruthless syndicate, a ghost story that wore $10,000 suits. Right now, however, the ghost story was bleeding. A dark, ugly stain was spreading rapidly across his immaculate white dress shirt just beneath the ribs. 2 other men flanked him, their suits equally ruined, their eyes scanning the empty laundromat with the frantic, lethal energy of cornered wolves. They had weapons drawn heavy, black, ugly things that seemed to swallow the neon light, and Dante Varelli's gun, equipped with a sleek silencer, was pointed directly at the space between Aria's eyes. "Not a sound," Dante ordered. His voice was low, rough, and thrummed with a terrifying, coiled energy. It didn't sound like a man who was bleeding out. It sounded like a predator assessing a minor obstacle. In any other circumstance, with any other person, this would be the moment of panic. The moment where the hostage drops to their knees, begs for their life, and promises silence. But Aria wasn't any other person. And she wasn't currently operating with a normal human capacity for fear. She was operating on 48 hours of sleep deprivation and the absolute certainty that her life could not possibly get any worse. She stared at the barrel of the gun. Then she looked down at the dark, thick drops of blood falling from his suit jacket, landing with quiet plops onto the linoleum she had just spent 40 minutes sanitizing with cheap industrial bleach. Something inside her, perhaps her survival instinct, perhaps her remaining sanity, simply snapped. She let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound, world-weary annoyance that echoed over the humming washing machines. Without breaking eye contact with the most dangerous man in the Midwest, Arya reached out. She didn't move fast, didn't make any sudden jerky motions. She just moved with the heavy, dragging lethargy of someone who was completely, utterly done. She grabbed a cheap, cracked plastic laundry basket from the folding table next to her and used the rim of it to gently, physically push the barrel of Dante's gun to the side. The two bodyguards visibly flinched, their fingers tightening on their triggers. They braced themselves for the inevitable sound of a neck snapping. Because what nobody outside of Dante's inner circle knew was that Dante Varelli suffered from severe wartime hyper-vigilance. A crippling, deeply ingrained touch aversion born from 12 years of surviving assassination attempts and brutal betrayals. His kill reflex was a hair trigger. Anyone who entered his 3-foot radius without explicit permission, anyone who made physical contact with him, triggered a violent, lethal response. His own men didn't hand him objects directly, they placed them on tables. His world was a sterile, untouchable isolation chamber built out of necessity. As Arya's hand holding the plastic basket brushed against his knuckles to redirect the gun, Dante's entire body tensed. His muscles coiled, his combat instincts screaming at him to strike, to neutralize, to destroy. But the strike never came because there was no adrenaline spiking in the air. There was no smell of fear sweat. There was no spike in her heart rate, no aggressive posture. There was only the dull, heavy, completely unthreatening weight of utter exhaustion. Her touch wasn't an attack. It was a sigh made physical. It short-circuited his PTSD. The violent electrical storm in his brain simply stopped. For the first time in over a decade, a physical interaction didn't feel like a threat. It felt like white noise. It felt like sudden, shocking quiet. Dante froze, his dark eyes widening by a fraction of a millimeter. He stared at her hand, then up at her face, completely destabilized by the absence of his own violent reaction. Arya didn't notice his internal crisis. She was too busy being annoyed. She turned away from him, turning her back on a loaded gun, an act of such staggering carelessness it made one of the bodyguards let out a choked breath and rummaged through a large cardboard box labeled Lost and Found, 30 days. She pulled out a faded, violently pink fuzzy hoodie featuring a peeling decal of Hello Kitty. It smelled faintly of cheap detergent and stale lavender. She turned back around and tossed it directly at Dante. It landed with a soft thwump against his chest. He caught it on pure reflex, staring at the pink fuzz as if she had just handed him a live grenade. Then she grabbed a roll of coarse brown paper towels from her cleaning cart and shoved those into his hands as well. "I don't care what Mafia movie you think you're in right now," Arya said, her voice flat and completely devoid of inflection. "But you are actively bleeding on the floor. I just spent an hour mopping, and my shift doesn't end for another 3 hours. She pointed a damp, pruny finger at a row of cracked orange plastic chairs bolted to the wall. "Go sit in the orange chair, put the pink sweater on so you stop dripping on my floor, and press the paper towels to your side. Your friends can stand by the detergent dispenser." She paused, picking up her mop again. "Or, just shoot me. Honestly, it might be a relief. At least I wouldn't have to clean the dryers." Silence fell over the laundromat, thick and suffocating, broken only by the steady slosh of clothes in machine number 4. Marco, Dante's right-hand man, tightened his grip on his weapon, looking at Dante for the signal to end the insanity. But Dante didn't give the signal. He stood there, a man who commanded an army of killers. A man who had just survived an ambush that left 6 men dead in an alley, holding a pink Hello Kitty hoodie and a roll of cheap paper towels. He looked at the exhausted girl with the dark circles under her eyes. He felt the phantom sensation of the plastic basket brushing his knuckles, the absence of his own violent reflex still echoing in his mind like a physical shock. Slowly, carefully, Dante lowered his gun. He engaged the safety and slid it back into his shoulder holster. Without a word, he walked over to the cracked, orange plastic chair. He sat down. He didn't put the pink hoodie on. He had some dignity left, but he did press it firmly against his bleeding side, wadding it up to absorb the blood. Marco stared at his boss, his jaw practically hitting the linoleum. "Boss? What are we—" "We are waiting," Dante said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a strange shiver down Arya's spine, despite her exhaustion. His dark eyes locked onto Arya, watching her as she dipped her mop back into the yellow bucket. "And we are apparently not dripping on her floor." For the next 2 hours, the most dangerous syndicate in Chicago sat in absolute silence in a rundown laundromat, while a 29-year-old girl named Arya Bennett mopped the floor around them. Dante watched her. He watched the mechanical, weary way she moved. He watched the way she occasionally winced as she stretched to reach under the folding tables. He watched the way she didn't look at him, didn't flinch, didn't sneak terrified glances. In a world where everyone performed for him, performed fear, performed respect, performed loyalty, she was just surviving. She was real. And in her presence, the constant deafening roar of his hyper-vigilance, the static electricity of paranoia that had defined his life for 12 years settled into a low, manageable hum. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. At 5:30 a.m., the rain stopped. Marco received a text message on his burner phone. "Cars are clean, boss. The perimeter is secure. We can move." Dante stood up slowly. The pink hoodie was now entirely ruined, soaked through with dark blood. He dropped it into a trash can. He looked paler, the blood loss taking a toll, but his posture remained perfectly rigid, predatory. He walked over to where Arya was wiping down the front of a washing machine with a rag. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, the edge of his invisible, lethal boundary. "What is your name?" Dante asked. Arya didn't stop wiping the glass. Arya Bennett." "You have a lot of courage, Arya Bennett." "I have a lot of debt and no sleep," she corrected, finally turning to look at him. Up close, the sheer physical presence of the man was overwhelming. The sharp angles of his jaw, the faint silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of blood. Courage takes energy. I'm running on fumes. Dante's lips twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to make Marco take a stunned step back. Dante reached into the inner pocket of his ruined suit jacket with his left hand. He pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills bound by a simple paper band. He didn't hand it to her. He knew his own limits, knew his reflexes might still betray him if she moved too fast, so he set it gently on the folding table next to her. It was easily $10,000. "For the floor," Dante said softly. "And the pink sweater." Arya stared at the money. It was more money than she made in 6 months. It was 2 months of her mother's treatments. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes wide, the exhaustion momentarily pierced by shock. "I can't take this," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time all night. "It's dirty." "Yes," Dante agreed quietly, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Everything I touch is dirty, but you're going to take it anyway, because you need it, and because I am going to be coming back here." Arya frowned, confusion battling with the desperation that demanded she take the cash. "Why? Why would you come back here? The machines barely work." Dante leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, testing the boundary of his own terror, his own aversion. He realized with a jolt that felt like lightning that he wanted to lean closer. He wanted to step into her space. "Because," Dante murmured, his voice meant only for her, "for the last 2 hours, I actually felt like I could breathe." He turned and walked out the glass door, his men trailing behind him like shadows. The bell jingled merrily in their wake. Arya stood alone in the fluorescent glare of the laundromat, the humming of the washing machine suddenly sounding very loud. She looked down at the stack of bills on the table, then at the faint, bloody footprint Dante had left near the orange chair. She had just survived a collision with a monster, but as she touched the cold, crisp paper of the $100 bills, she had the terrifying realization that the monster wasn't done with her yet. And worse, a small, dark, lonely part of her didn't want him to be. Dante returned the next night, and the night after that. He didn't come bleeding this time. He arrived at exactly 2 a.m., wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, carrying a sleek laptop. He walked to the same cracked orange plastic chair, sat down, and opened his computer. He didn't order her around. He didn't speak. He just occupied space in the sterile, buzzing environment of spin and dry, flanked by his invisible guards outside. For the first few nights, Arya was terrified. She kept her head down, scrubbing the lint traps with excessive vigor, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't take $10,000 from a Mafia boss without paying a price. But Dante demanded nothing. He simply existed in her periphery. It didn't take long for Arya to realize that the laundromat had changed. The aggressive junkies who usually loitered by the back exit had vanished. The local gang members who sometimes came in to hassle her for free change were nowhere to be seen. The broken neon sign outside had miraculously been repaired. The entire block had gone completely, terrifyingly quiet. Dante had thrown an invisible, ironclad shield over her workplace. On the fourth night, the silence was broken. A drunk, stumbling man pushed through the doors, waving a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. He didn't notice the expensive black cars parked outside in the shadows. He didn't notice Marco standing near the detergent dispensers. He only saw Dante sitting in the orange chair, typing on his laptop. "Hey, suit," the drunk slurred, staggering toward Dante. "You got $1? Hey, I'm talking to you." The man lunged forward, reaching out a grimy hand to grab Dante's shoulder. It happened so fast, it was a blur. Before the drunk's fingers even made contact, Dante moved. His laptop was cast aside. He rose from the chair with terrifying mechanical speed. His right hand shot out, seizing the drunk's wrist. He twisted it backward with a sickening crack. The man screamed, dropping his bottle, which shattered on the linoleum. Dante slammed him face first into the folding table, pulling a sleek combat knife from his inner jacket. His eyes were wide, dilated, entirely swallowed by the blackness of an adrenalized kill state. He wasn't seeing a drunk man. He was seeing ghosts. He was reacting to a decade of betrayal, every muscle primed to sever an artery. Marco drew his weapon, but he stayed 3 feet away. Boss, stand down. It's just a drunk." Dante didn't hear him. The hyper-vigilance had taken over, locking him in a terrifying loop of defensive violence. His chest heaved, the knife pressed against the man's throat. "Dante." The voice was quiet, raspy, and completely devoid of panic. Arya stood 5 feet away, holding a warm, damp towel she had just pulled from the dryer. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She walked slowly, deliberately toward him. Marco flinched. "Miss, don't step closer. He'll kill you. He can't process." Arya ignored him. She stopped right beside Dante. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the absolute coiled tension of a predator about to strike. Slowly, she reached out. She didn't grab his arm. She didn't try to pull him away. She simply took the warm, clean towel and draped it gently over his tense, rigid forearm, the arm holding the knife. "He broke a bottle on my clean floor, Dante," she said, her voice a calm, steady hum over the roar of the washing machines. "Let him go. I have enough glass to sweep up." The moment the warm fabric touched his skin, Dante froze. The kill reflex, screaming in his ears, collided with the absolute safety of her presence. There was no adrenaline in her touch, no fear in her voice, just the comforting, domestic warmth of laundry and the grounded reality of a woman who was too tired for violence. Dante's breathing shuddered. The blackness in his eyes began to recede, revealing the terrified, exhausted man trapped underneath the monster. He looked down at the towel on his arm. Then he looked at Arya. He dropped the drunk. The man scrambled away, sobbing and clutching his broken wrist, bolting out the door. Dante stood there, his chest rising and falling heavily. He looked at the knife in his hand as if he didn't know how it got there. He sheathed it slowly. He looked at Arya, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability he hid from the world. The absolute agony of living in a body that perceived every shadow as an executioner. "I could have hurt you," he whispered, his voice raw. "My body, it reacts. I don't control it. If you touch me when I'm like that..." "You didn't," she said simply. She picked up the broom. "You stopped." "No one stops me when I'm like that. No one can." "I did." Arya began sweeping the broken glass. "Now sit down. You're making me nervous standing there looking like you're about to apologize." Dante stared at her, utterly undone. He had built an empire through terror. He ruled a city through absolute unyielding control. Yet here, in this rundown laundromat, a girl with a broom commanded him with nothing but her exhaustion and her strange, soothing apathy. He sat down. The next night, Dante arrived at 2 a.m., but he didn't bring his laptop. Instead, he brought a sleek black portfolio. He sat in his chair and watched her work. At 3:30 a.m., during a lull when no machines were running, Arya went into the small, cramped back room. It was meant for storage, but she had cleared out a corner. It was her sanctuary. The walls were covered in canvases, vibrant, chaotic splashes of oil paint, deep crimson, violent blues, slashing yellows. She painted to stay awake. She painted to scream when she was too tired to make a sound. She was dabbing a harsh streak of black across a canvas when a shadow fell over her. Dante stood in the doorway. He was looking at her paintings, his dark eyes tracking the violent, raw emotion in every brushstroke. "You're an artist," he said. It wasn't a question. Arya stiffened. "I throw cheap paint at cheap canvas so I don't lose my mind. It's not art, it's survival." "It's loud," he murmured, stepping into the cramped room. He kept a respectful distance, keenly aware of his own dangerous reflexes. "It's full of rage, like someone trapped behind glass, screaming to be heard." Arya looked at him, surprised. The rich people she occasionally encountered usually called her work messy or unrefined. Dante looked at it and saw exactly what it was. "I've been invisible my whole life," she confessed softly, wiping paint off her hands with a rag. "Serving people, cleaning up after people, painting is the only time I get to take up space." Dante turned to her. The intensity in his gaze made the small room feel suddenly very hot. "You take up a great deal of space, Arya Bennett. You just don't realize it." He stepped out of the room, returning a moment later with the black portfolio he had brought. He set it on the washing machine next to her. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Arya opened the leather flap. Inside was a stack of official-looking documents. Legal papers from St. Jude's Medical Center. She flipped through them, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs. They were receipts. Invoices. Her mother's entire medical debt, every chemotherapy session, every hospital stay, every outstanding loan that had been suffocating Arya for 3 years was stamped paid in full. Arya felt her knees go weak. She clutched the edge of the washing machine. "Dante, what did you do?" "I removed an obstacle," he said calmly. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't pay you back. I told you the 10,000 was already too much. I can't? I don't want to be paid back." Dante's voice hardened, taking on the authoritative edge of a syndicate boss. "I don't do favors, Arya. I make investments, and you are not allowed to refuse this." "Why?" she demanded, tears burning the corners of her eyes. "Why are you doing this? I'm just a janitor. I'm nobody." Dante took a step closer, breaking his own 3-foot rule. He looked down at her, his expression a mixture of profound exhaustion and dark sincerity. "For 12 years, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate gravel, "I have not slept for more than 3 hours at a time. I have not eaten a meal without tasting ash. I cannot let a human being touch me without my body preparing for a fight to the death. I am living in a sensory deprivation tank built out of paranoia. He reached out slowly. He didn't touch her, but his hand hovered inches from her cheek. And then I walked in here, and you pushed a loaded gun out of your face with a laundry basket and threw a pink sweater at me. You didn't fear me. You didn't perform for me. Your presence, it turns the noise off. You gave me the only hours of peace I have had in a decade. A hospital bill is an insultingly cheap price for my sanity. Arya stared into his dark eyes, seeing the broken, desperate man pleading for an anchor in a storm of his own making. She didn't argue anymore. She couldn't. Later that week, the ultimate test of their strange dynamic occurred. It was 4 a.m. The rain had returned, drumming a steady, hypnotic beat against the laundromat windows. Arya was exhausted, leaning against the counter, reading a worn paperback. She glanced over at the orange chairs. Dante was there, as always, but his head was tilted back against the peeling wallpaper. His laptop was closed on his lap. His eyes were shut. His breathing was deep, slow, and completely even. He was asleep. The most dangerous man in Chicago, a man who slept with a gun under his pillow and 3 locked doors between him and the world, had fallen into a deep REM sleep in a public laundromat. Marco was standing by the door, staring at his boss in sheer disbelief. He caught Arya's eye and mouthed the word, "Impossible." Arya watched Dante for a long moment. He looked younger in sleep, the harsh lines of tension smoothed away from his face. The air conditioning in the laundromat was fierce, blowing directly onto him. He shivered slightly in his sleep. Arya put her book down. She walked into the back room and grabbed a worn, knitted fleece blanket she kept for her breaks. She walked over to Dante. Marco tensed, raising a hand. "Don't," he whispered frantically. "If you touch him while he's asleep, he'll wake up fighting. He broke an assassin's neck doing that last year. Don't touch him." Arya ignored him. She knew the monster, but she also knew the man. She stepped right into his space. She unfolded the blanket and gently, carefully draped it over his shoulders, tucking it lightly around his chest. Her fingers brushed against his neck, a fleeting, undeniable touch. Dante's eyes snapped open. Instantly, his body jerked. His hand flew toward his holster, his combat instincts exploding into wakefulness. The predator was loose, but before his fingers could grasp the weapon, his eyes focused. He smelled lavender detergent and cheap coffee. He saw the faded apron. He felt the soft, domestic weight of the blanket on his shoulders. The violent reflex died instantly. The adrenaline spike vanished before it could fully form. His hand dropped away from the gun. He looked up at Arya, who was standing inches away, adjusting the corner of the blanket without a trace of fear. Dante stared at her, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from the threat of an assassin, but from the staggering realization of what had just happened. She had touched him while he slept. She had breached his ultimate defense mechanism, and he hadn't attacked. He had simply woken up. "You were shivering," she whispered, her hazel eyes soft in the neon light. Dante reached up slowly. He wrapped his large, dangerous hand around her wrist. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact. His grip was firm, but trembling slightly with the weight of the moment. He pressed his lips to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you," he breathed, the words carrying the weight of a confession. In the neon-lit quiet of the laundromat, Dante Varelli realized he had found his cure. But he also realized something far more dangerous. He had found his weakness. And in his world, a weakness was just a target waiting to be hit. Secrets do not survive in the Chicago underworld. They are currency, and eventually everyone cashes out. It took 3 weeks for the rumors to metastasize. Whispers spread through the dark arteries of the city that Dante Varelli, the untouchable ghost, the man who felt nothing and spared no one, had gone soft. They said he spent hours every night in a decrepit laundromat on the south side. They said he had a weakness, and in Dante's world, Viktor Kozlov was a man who specialized in exploiting weaknesses. Viktor was the head of a rival Russian syndicate that had been trying to bleed Dante's territory dry for 2 years. He was ruthless, calculating, and tired of the stalemate. When his informants brought him photographs of Dante sleeping in a cracked orange chair while a janitor swept the floor, Viktor didn't laugh. He saw the crack in the armor. The hit happened on a Tuesday at 2:45 a.m. Dante hadn't arrived yet. He had been delayed by a stubborn territory dispute downtown. Marco had stepped outside to check the perimeter, the rain muffling his footsteps. Arya was alone inside, spin and dry, humming softly as she loaded towels into dryer number 7. The glass of the front door didn't shatter, it disintegrated. The suppressed thwip-thwip-thwip of automatic weapons tore through the neon-lit silence. The laundry machine sparked and exploded, raining hot metal and sudsy water across the linoleum. Arya dropped to the floor instantly, her survival instincts overriding her panic. She scrambled behind the heavy steel reinforced counter, curling into a tight ball as bullets shredded the drywall above her head. Through the chaos, she heard the heavy thud of boots kicking through the remaining glass. Not police, hitmen. 4 of them, moving with tactical precision. "Check the back," a voice barked in a thick guttural accent. "Find the girl. Kozlov wants her alive if possible, dead if necessary." Arya clamped her hand over her mouth, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might break her ribs. They weren't here for Dante. They were here for her. The shield he had thrown over her had just become a target painted on her back. Heavy footsteps approached the counter. A black combat boot kicked the wooden side panel. "She's back here," a man sneered. He leaned over the counter, the elongated barrel of his suppressed weapon pointing directly down at her trembling frame. Arya closed her eyes. She thought of her mother. She thought of her unfinished paintings. She thought of Dante's dark eyes softening when she draped the blanket over his shoulders. The hitman's finger tightened on the trigger. Then the world exploded. It wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of a human body being hit with the force of a freight train. Arya opened her eyes just in time to see the hitman ripped violently backward over the counter, as if yanked by a demonic force. A sickening crack echoed through the room, followed immediately by the dull thud of a lifeless body hitting the linoleum. "Contact!" Another hitman screamed. Then there was only the monster. Dante Varelli had entered the building. He didn't use a gun. He moved through the narrow aisles of the laundromat like a shadow composed of pure, unadulterated violence. The hyper-vigilance that tormented his every waking hour was no longer a curse. It was a devastating weapon. He processed threats before they materialized. He moved faster than human reflex allowed. A second man raised his weapon. Dante was already inside his guard, driving the heel of his palm upward, shattering the man's sternum with a sound that made Arya gag. The man collapsed. The remaining 2 hitmen opened fire frantically, obliterating the dryers. Dante moved seamlessly, using the environment, his custom suit a blur of dark motion. He caught the 3rd man by the throat, slamming him into the reinforced glass of a washing machine until the glass gave way. The 4th man turned to run. Dante drew his knife. It flew through the air, embedding itself precisely in the base of the man's skull. He dropped before reaching the door. It took exactly 12 seconds. 4 highly trained killers were dead. The laundromat was a smoking ruin of shattered glass, leaking water and blood. Marco burst through the door, his own weapon drawn, panting heavily. He had taken down 2 more outside. He stopped dead, surveying the carnage. Dante stood in the center of the room. He was covered in blood, most of it not his own. His chest was heaving. The kill state had completely consumed him. His eyes were wide, dilated, tracking invisible threats in the flickering neon light. His hands were curled into fists, his muscles locked in a terrifying rictus of adrenaline and paranoia. His touch aversion was screaming at maximum volume. If Marco stepped closer, Dante would kill him without recognizing him. Boss, Marco said softly, lowering his weapon slowly. It's clear. They're down. Dante didn't hear him. He was trapped in the loop, his trauma screaming that the threat was never truly gone. From behind the counter, Arya stood up slowly. Her apron was covered in drywall dust. Her hands were shaking violently. She stepped out into the aisle, her boots splashing in the mixture of detergent and blood. Marco panicked. Arya, stop. Do not approach him. He's locked in. He won't recognize? Shut up, Marco, Arya said. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop walking. She navigated the bodies. She walked right up to the boundary, the invisible 3-foot line that separated Dante from the rest of the world. Dante's head snapped toward her. The predator in him assessed her, his jaw clenched. He looked ready to tear her apart. Arya didn't hesitate. She didn't offer a blanket or a towel this time. She reached out with her bare, trembling hand and placed it flat against his blood-soaked chest, right over his racing heart. Dante, she whispered. I'm okay. I'm right here. You're safe. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. The moment her skin touched him, the moment the absolute pure absence of threat registered in his violently short-circuiting brain, Dante collapsed. He didn't fall to the floor, but the tension drained out of him so fast his knees buckled. He fell forward, wrapping his massive arms around her, burying his face in her dusty shoulder. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of cheap soap and stale coffee as if it were oxygen. His massive frame shook with the adrenaline crash. I've got you, Arya murmured, wrapping her arms around his waist, ignoring the blood soaking into her apron. I've got you. Marco lowered his gun completely, staring at the sight in profound, silent shock. The most dangerous man in the syndicate was holding a janitor like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Later that night, the cleanup crew had removed the bodies. The laundromat was closed, its windows boarded up. Dante and Arya sat in the small back room, surrounded by her vibrant paintings. Dante had washed the blood from his hands, but the shadows in his eyes remained. He sat on a small stool, staring at his hands. Koslav knows, Dante said. His voice was a flat, dead monolith of sound. He knows what you are to me. Arya sat on the floor across from him, her knees pulled to her chest. He sent them to kill me? No. He sent them to take you. Dante looked up, and the cold, terrifying certainty in his eyes made Arya shiver. He wanted to take you alive. He wanted to use you to break me, because he knows that if he hurts you, I won't just surrender my territory. I will burn my own empire to the ground to keep you safe. Arya swallowed hard. So, what do? We double the guards? We? No. Dante stood up. The vulnerability of the adrenaline crash was gone. The syndicate boss had returned, but this time he wasn't playing defense. Guards aren't enough. Victor is backed by a massive national network, the Bratva. If I stay here and play defense, it's only a matter of time before one of them gets lucky. They will never stop coming for you, Arya, because you are my heart. He walked over to a painting she had been working on, a canvas of dark shadows pierced by a single blinding streak of yellow. I can't protect you by waiting, Dante said. I have to destroy the threat at its root. I have to dismantle Koslav, his backers, and anyone who even whispers your name. Okay, Arya said, her voice steady, despite the fear rising in her throat. Then we fight. Dante turned to her, his expression shattering her heart before he even spoke the words. Not we, Dante said softly. Me. Arya stood up quickly. No. Dante, no. You promised? I promised to keep you safe, he interrupted, closing the distance between them and taking her face in his hands. And the only way you are safe is if you are completely removed from this world, removed from me. While I am fighting this war, anyone standing next to me is a target. I don't care, she cried, tears finally spilling over her lashes. I've been invisible my whole life. I'd rather be a target next to you than safe and alone. Arya, Listen to me. His thumbs wiped away her tears. His touch was so gentle it was agonizing. This isn't a street fight. It's a scorched earth war. I am going to have to become the monster completely. I am going to have to do things, brutal, unforgivable things, to tear Victor's network apart from the inside out. He pressed his forehead to hers. If you stay with me, you will watch me become something terrifying. And worse, Victor will find a way to use you against me. If I hesitate for 1 second because I'm worried about your safety, I die. And if I die, you die. Arya sobbed, her hands gripping his shirt desperately. How long? I don't know, he whispered. Months, maybe more. But Marco is staying with you. He has documents. He has the deed to a property I bought for you in the arts district. It's a gallery, Arya. Your gallery. Secure, fully funded, completely untraceable back to me. I don't want a gallery. I want you. You will have me, Dante promised, his voice fierce, absolute. When the war is over, when there is no one left alive who can threaten you, I will come back. I swear it on my life. He kissed her then. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, bruising, tasting of salt and blood and the terrifying finality of a long goodbye. He poured every unspoken fear, every ounce of his ruined soul into that kiss, memorizing the feeling of her, the absolute grounding safety of her touch. When he finally pulled away, Arya's eyes were closed, her chest heaving. I love you, she whispered into the dark. I love you, Dante replied. And that is why I have to leave. When Arya opened her eyes, the room was empty. The monster had gone to war 6 months later. The rain was beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of The Haven, an exclusive, highly sought-after art gallery in the heart of the Arts District. The lighting was warm, illuminating, vibrant, chaotic canvases that sold for thousands of dollars to anonymous buyers. Arya Bennett, no longer wearing a faded blue apron, stood before a massive unfinished canvas in the center of the room. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair pinned up loosely. She held a palette knife, staring intensely at the mixture of dark charcoal and deep, violent crimson on the canvas. It was past midnight. The gallery was closed to the public. The only other person in the room was Marco. Marco no longer wore a bespoke suit. He wore a heavy tactical jacket over a Kevlar vest, and he stood perfectly still near the reinforced front doors. He was Dante's most lethal shadow, and for the past 6 months, he had been Arya's constant, silent guardian. He never spoke of Dante. He only spoke of perimeters, security codes, and threat assessments. Arya hadn't heard Dante's voice in 182 days. She only saw the echoes of his war. She saw it on the late-night news broadcasts, a Russian shipping magnate found dead in his London penthouse, a massive warehouse explosion in New York, a string of unexplained disappearances within the high ranks of the Bratva. The underworld was tearing itself apart, consumed by a fire Dante had ignited to burn Viktor Koslov's network to ash. Every night, she painted the violence she couldn't see, and every night she prayed for the monster who was fighting in the dark so she could stand in the light. Thunder rattled the heavy glass windows. Arya sighed, dropping her palette knife onto the wooden tray. She was so tired. It was a different kind of exhaustion than the laundromat. It was a heavy emotional fatigue, a constant ache in her chest that never fully subsided. Marco, she said softly, reaching for a rag to wipe her hands. We should close up. The storm is getting worse. Marco didn't answer. Arya turned around. Marco was standing by the door, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. Every muscle in his body was tense, his eyes locked on the shadowy street outside. Arya's heart plummeted. The fear, the constant low-level anxiety she had carried for 6 months, instantly flared into panic. Had Victor found her? Had the war finally reached her doorstep? Marco? She whispered, taking a step back toward the secure panic room hidden behind the back wall. Marco stared at the shadows. Then, slowly, the tension drained out of his massive shoulders. He didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he reached out, unlocked the heavy deadbolts, and pulled the reinforced glass door open. He stepped outside into the rain, turning his back to the entrance, standing guard in the storm. A figure stepped through the open door, bringing the smell of ozone, rain, and cold leather into the warm gallery. Arya stopped breathing. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader under a soaked, heavy black overcoat. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked exhausted, haunted, a predator pushed to the absolute edge of his endurance. There was a thin, jagged new scar cutting across the sharp angle of his jaw, and a dark, terrifying emptiness in his eyes, the look of a man who had been locked in a kill state for half a year. Dante Varelli stood in the entryway, water pooling around his expensive boots. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, the invisible boundary. The gallery was perfectly silent, save for the storm raging outside. Dante didn't move. His chest rose and fell with ragged, uneven breaths. His hands, shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, were trembling slightly. He looked at her, at the clean dress, the beautiful gallery, the absolute safety he had bought with his own soul. He looked like a man staring at a mirage, terrified that if he reached out, it would vanish. Arya didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the blood on his hands or the war he was waging. She only saw the man who had fallen asleep in a cracked orange chair. She closed the distance between them. She reached up, her clean, warm hands framing his cold, rain-slicked face. Her thumbs gently traced the sharp line of his jaw, brushing over the new scar. The reaction was instantaneous. Dante let out a broken, shuddering breath. The terrifying, empty darkness in his eyes shattered. His hyper-vigilance, the screaming paranoia that had kept him alive for 6 brutal months, short-circuited the moment her skin touched his. He collapsed forward, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his massive arms wrapping around her waist with a desperate, crushing grip. He felt like ice, but as she held him, she felt the violent tremor in his muscles slowly begin to subside. "You're okay," she whispered fiercely, burying her face in his wet hair, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "You're here. You're okay." Dante held her tighter, inhaling the scent of paint and lavender, pulling himself back from the edge of the abyss he had been living in. After a long moment, he pulled back just enough to look at her face. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that took her breath away. Did you finish the war?" Arya asked softly, her thumbs still tracing his cheekbones. Dante looked at her, at the woman who was his sanctuary, his cure, and his only weakness. The monster inside him wasn't dead, it was just resting. "Not yet," Dante said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped forward, pulling her flush against his chest, stepping fully into the light. "But I needed to come home for a minute." Will Dante survive the final battle with the Russian syndicate to protect the woman he loves, or will the war finally consume the monster of Chicago? If you want to hear part 2 of Dante and Arya's story, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you think Dante can truly leave the Mafia behind.